tardes. Antes de dar inicio a la junta, si hay algunas personas que necesiten escuchar la junta en español, tenemos audífonos para poder traducir lo que se está llevando a cabo. Gracias.
All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the special meeting of the Board of Trustees of East Central Independent School District being held May 10th, 2022, beginning at 5:30 in the East Central Cafeteria. Secretary, can we have one roll?
Yes, sir. Dalbert. Present. Ginger Friesenhot. Here. Victor Garza.
Here.
Coach Mulkey.
Here.
Monique Presses. Here. Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We'll move on to prayer and pledge. Mr. Scott?
Good evening, Mr. Toscano, President Massagill, trustees, and audience members. Thank y'all so much for being here tonight. If you'll please bow your head for the prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, our community, and all the leaders who worked so hard for our school district. Today, we ask that you would give us wisdom and resolve as we listen and make decisions for the district. Today, we ask that you give us Today, please help us, keep us safe and healthy and rested so that we continue to have the ability to guide the district. May we be empowered by your Spirit to see the needs of our students and community and meet them. We pray for the health and safety of every student and staff member at every facility in the district. Give us the strength as leaders to display courage, hope, generosity, and kindness to honor and inspire those around us. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coates. We will move on to item 4, public comments. Thank you. Looks like we have 4 people signed up to speak. I'm going to start the public comments with Bonnie Carr. Ms. Carr, before you start speaking, we'll have 3 minutes for each person. We'll limit it to 3 minutes.
I don't really need to speak, I just need to bring the topic to the attention of school traffic on New Sulphur Springs Road. With the development of the new subdivision just past Beck, even before it's finished, right now traffic is very dangerous. I live in the Mill Ridge subdivision, which is right behind the football field, and in the mornings trying to get kids to school, it's just too dangerous. So I did call the city to report Beck and request a traffic study, but they still, usually you see the rubber map and I don't see anything yet. So I didn't know if maybe if the district had requested a traffic study for New Sulphur Springs Road, if the city or the county would take it more seriously. That's all. It's just very dangerous right now in New Sulphur Springs.
Thank you so much, Ms. Carr. We'll move on to, it looks like Ruben Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, Board. Mine is pretty much picking back out first, but mine's closer to the schools over here on 410 and Sulphur Springs and South Cross. There's quite a bit of new development on our side, and what I would like to see is, the city pretty much neglects all that side of 410 in our side of town. We need some turnarounds on 410, both on right there on Sulphur Springs and South Cross, and also on WW White Road. It would help ease a lot of the traffic in the mornings. We have new developments there on WW White Road, and new developments on WW 410 on the other side. We have a ton of new students coming around, new family members coming. Every morning when I'm heading to Legacy to drop off my daughter, it's only one lane to make that turn back around to Legacy. You'll see a ton of people on the non-turning right lane darting and cutting people off. Or you'll see people from Sulphur Springs coming back across, and they're passing the red lights and almost getting into accidents. Or you'll see the utility trucks that are F-550s, F-750s passing the lights. So there is going to be a horrendous accident one day for people passing the lights, trying to get to work, drop off their kids, because the lights just are not very long. There's so much traffic. You know, the light, when it turns red, the traffic to try to turn back to get to Legacy is already backed up all the way into 410 to try to get back to the school. And the same thing on the other side where they put the traffic lights back up on WW and 410. And coincidentally coming from Southcross, you know, back towards Legacy on Holt, you know, there should be if not a big one, but a right turning lane only to try to ease some of that traffic coming the other way. I mean, if the district can try to help petition TxDOT or the city to try to get some of those things done and help ease a lot of that traffic for the school, for Holt, or even try to get Holt to help us, you know, get some of those things accomplished that would ease a lot of the traffic. Because once all those subdivisions are done, it's going to get worse. And then once the rezoning is done with Heritage, and a lot of those students are going to come back that way, the Legacy is going to get even worse. So I think something has to be done. If there are turnarounds there on both of those sides of 410, it'll ease a lot of the traffic and help us avoid some, you know, major accident that's going to hurt some of our family members and the students trying to get to school in the morning.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to, it looks like Christina Gonzalez.
Good evening. So what I'd like to address is the Legacy Middle School. We talk a lot about the student violence and trouble in the school. My daughter is a seventh grader there. We did ask for a transfer to Heritage. We heard the school did better there. We were told that the student population at Heritage, they're going not to be a transfer. So I have another student coming in sixth grade this fall also. But my daughter is at the point where she's afraid to go to the restroom during passing periods, may go to restrooms further away because those are the less populated areas. Because they're boys and girls restrooms, there have been fights in the restrooms, there's fights in the hallways during passing periods. My daughter actually got trampled by a teacher jumping over students to try to get to stop the fight. So we've addressed it with the principal, we talked to everybody at the school, my husband and I both been there and talked to her, because it's not gotten better. It's seems to have gotten worse. And I heard that they're gonna send more students over there in the fall because of the population of Heritage. So I think it's just gonna get even worse. The students are out of control there. There's no control for the students. And I don't know what else to do. I know they just try to start a parent thing to have some of the dads come, but how much protection are our dads gonna have if they do that? Or how much can they possibly do? Because you can't stop a fight without hurting somebody or possibly hurting somebody, then they're gonna get in trouble. So I mean, it's kind of, I think that's why a lot of people didn't volunteer for it, but they did ask for that for a while. Not that they have much of a response. But I'm just happy to see if maybe we can get a bit more security at the school. I don't know, schools have to be there all day long, or somebody, or a hall monitor, some kind of duty start to monitor the hallways during the passing period, especially. I mean, there's even fights in the classroom. My daughter has had actual fights in the classroom. Yeah, there's that.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. All right, before we move on to superintendent's reports, I would like to personally thank everyone that is in the audience out there for showing up for this meeting. It's going to be a very important meeting. Y'all can see a lot of information on what is going on in the district as far as demographic study, as far as population loans, and a lot of what the public speakers were talking about. So anyway, I do really appreciate everyone showing up to this meeting. We'll be probably having some more information as it comes out, and we'll forward that to you all as well. So thank y'all very much. We'll move on to the superintendent's report, 5.1, demographic study presentation. Mr. Scott?
Sir, Mr. President, trustees, as Mr. Mastergill alluded to, tonight's agenda topic is the sole topic. Demographic study has been completed by our demographer, PAZA. PAZA, as you recall, did our demographic study last year, and PAZA is out of College Station, and this is what they do. And they focus on fast growth communities. They specialize in really invasive studies around population growth as it relates to potential student growth. And so we're all aware as a community that there is substantial residential development in our community. And what we hope to do tonight is get brought up to speed on just how much that has changed in the last year and a half, and which direction is it heading. This particular board meeting is being streamed live. It will also be archived and posted on the website, so tell your friends, neighbors, and family they couldn't make it tonight and they couldn't stream it live, that they'll be able to access this content through the website as well. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Stacy Tavera and her colleague Justin, in whichever order works best for you guys. Also, trustees, you have a binder that has the complete demographic study as well as a copy of the slide deck. So if you want to follow along in either way that works best for you, please feel free to do that. So, Justin, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? All right, I'll let this just get sad. Yep, I'm up first. So a lot has changed in East Central in the last couple of years since we started working with the district. I really enjoyed the first two comments of the public speaker, the infrastructure commentary. Keep them coming. You know, with this kind of growth, it's not going to stop. Those are great things to bring up. Constructive. Oh, I guess I can get closer. Yeah, I'll try. Sorry, you couldn't hear me, but no, those comments are constructive. Growth brings with it other issues like traffic, and some of it came per minute. So I hope some elected officials are here tonight who can work on some of those issues. But yes, we do work with many high growth districts in Texas. Believe it or not, the phenomenal growth we're seeing here, sometimes we work with districts many times throughout the year with double to triple. So we are well familiar with what it can bring. And you're just at the tip of the iceberg, the base, really. It hasn't even started yet. And that's what we're going to go across today. So without any further ado, I'm going to try to lean in here so I can get this microphone on. I've been starting a lot of district slides with this slide here because the pandemic did have an effect on enrollments. In fact, statewide, we lost over 2% of public school enrollment in 2020. So we're still seeing those effects today. We estimate there could be anywhere from 150 to 225 or so students that still remain out of school. And they could be anywhere. They could be in virtual programs, which technically are public schools. They could still be homeschooled. And some of those may have already come back this spring. So we're dealing with that as we're dealing with the growth. It was not a great double whammy. And we also got hit by charter schools, that last bullet down here. We had about 3 or 4 big ones, of course, that opened up in the 410 corridor a couple of years ago. So that's a triple whammy. It's a kind of nightmare for me to deal with all these different swings, what's going on. But the housing acceleration, that middle bullet there, in 2021, is really what's driving a lot of this growth. We know that mortgages were at historic lows. We have not forgotten that. We know that interest rates are rising. We accounted for that as best we can in our projections. I just want to throw that out there right now. Everything's dynamic. When we started this project for East Central a year and a half ago, the pandemic had just started. That was something that was changing. The world was changing. And now we're dealing with somewhat of the reverse. So the world never stops turning. No one knows what the future may hold. So we are taking our knowledge of what's on the ground today and what we know is coming, which I'll talk about later, and we're projecting forward as best we can with 3 scenarios of growth. And I'll go over those last. But let's talk about COVID. So I mentioned we believe there are still several hundred students who didn't return. I just want to show you 6 slides, 6 graphs here. East Central is on the top left. I'm actually going to stand right here. Sorry. East Central is on the top left. We have 5 other school districts. All clients we've worked with this year, and many we've worked with for 15 to 25 years. The red bars are projected, that's actual enrollment. The gray bars are projected enrollment. So you can see every single school district did not actually hit their projected enrollment over the last couple of years, not even this year. It's been a wild card with COVID. The return in some districts was greater, but in all, it didn't really hit the mark. So I want you to know that everyone is under their projection for the most part due to COVID. So let's talk about the economy real quick. We know it's been up and down the last couple of years. But just know that San Antonio has now hit 100% recovery, essentially, 103%, and that's as a March of jobs have been recovered. Basically, all the jobs lost due to the pandemic have returned, and a few extra. And so that's going to continue. Job growth has been really strong in Central Texas. We don't see that slowing down anytime soon. And of course, jobs bring people. And you have a lot of new jobs coming in, especially that Foster Road corridor. If you haven't driven out there, I think you should. I'm sure the traffic's pretty bad there too, probably 18 wheelers. New home construction. The market's been crazy. As I mentioned, those low mortgage rates, that's what's been really driving a lot of this acceleration. I have some districts, not here in San Antonio in particular, but in Houston and in Austin, that had seen 40 to 45% more housing in 2021 than had been projected. And that's phenomenal. That takes effort to get incorrect. Believe me, I've been doing this a lot. So those low mortgage rates were kind of a surprise after the pandemic, but now they're getting back to where they were and even a little higher. So that's something we, of course, have to keep monitoring as we move forward. This is one of my favorite charts. It's not a great chart for the district, unfortunately, but it's one of my favorite charts just because it shows a couple of things. What it's showing, and you can't see the year, unfortunately, but basically, the left side of the chart is 2014, I believe, and the right side of the chart is 2021. It's about 7 years or so of data, going from older to newer. The yellow is ECISD enrollment, and the light purple is charter school enrollment. Those are really the only 2 colors I want you to focus on. The yellow has stayed about the same over the last 6 or 7 years, and look at that purple. It's doubled. And so every year on average, the district's TEA data estimates that about 90 students from ECISD attend charter school, so 90 additional students. So you can see, just from 2020 to 2021, we had growth of about 150 students in charters that live here. So that, even though you're seeing growth overall, in that period, growth has gone from about 11,000 to well over 12,000 K-12 students in this district. The school district has consistently seen that. We believe that's about to change. And really, it has to do with housing growth. Because in that period, your housing growth wasn't booming like it has been the last 30 years. So let's talk about a few trends. This is fresh data, by the way. TEA just released this about a week ago or so. And so what I'm showing you here is growth. Oh, I'm sorry, this is just total enrollment. So fall 2021. And I'm going to take a second here to explain why we use fall enrollment. Because many of you may not be familiar with our process or how TEA functions. So there's a snapshot taken every year for student enrollment, and that's done in late October. Think about Halloween time. And so that snapshot is used for all sorts of purposes. It's the official enrollment count for your district, funding, allocations rely on that. And one thing that's true is from the beginning of the school year in August through October, enrollment grows every year. You don't start out with the same number of students you end up with in October. So I always think of October as being the peak enrollment. It can increase after, but this is that official snapshot date, and we project to that date for every year. So every annual projection you see is an October snapshot. So this is an October snapshot from 2021, showing you East Central's position in the metro area with over 10,000 students. You rank number 10 in terms of overall enrollment. You can see a few districts around you. Assured Cibolo is at 15,000. So your big ones, of course, are North Side and Northeast, with the most amount. They're geographically the largest. Now, when you look at growth, this is just 1 year of growth. So remember, we had COVID. Some districts had a return, not everyone. You can see any district on the map that's in blue or that green color actually lost students again in 2021. So our big districts like Northeast and North Side did not gain students this year. And that was true in a lot of large districts as well. Houston, Dallas saw the same thing. East Central actually ranked number 6 in terms of growth this year with only 236 students in the metro area. So just remember that. It doesn't seem like we're growing by that much. I mean, to you, 236 students might be a lot. To me, that's not. I deal with districts that gain 2,000 to 4,000 a year in some cases. But you can see Kamal up there with 1,800. But you're up there now in terms of growth. Some of the big districts that have been growing historically over the last 3 decades aren't growing as much. They're running out of housing, and charter schools are taking some of their growth too. So these are annual growth rates for the district. You can see you had 1-2% growth many years going back all the way to the about 2010. Again, it's chopped off there on the bottom. But then you can see it kind of started leveling out with some of the charter school influence. When you have charter schools, they take away students. They tend to take away the youngest cohorts, kindergarten, first grade first, and then they build their grade levels up. So we have to think about that. We have to remember what happened 3 years ago, or 2 years ago at Idea Converse, and keep moving forward in time, because they don't stop adding grades. And then you can see COVID's 3.7% loss. Many of that was in the lower grades, as we saw statewide, nationwide, and then we had that 2.5% bump. So one thing we also look at is births. It's a gauge of what's happening. In your district, there's nothing really telling, I wouldn't say yet, but that'll change. So what you're looking at here are 2 lines. Orange is the actual number of births. This is from the state health department. Babies born in your school district, as best we can get. This is by zip code, and we have to do a little bit of estimation because, of course, they don't actually calculate by school district, but we do. And then that blue line is your kindergarten actual enrollment up until this year. And so you can see it got jagged there with COVID. It actually dropped again a little this year. A lot of that's because the charter school growth as well. But you can see the birth line is actually increasing pretty steadily. And you crossed over there at one point. At one point, your enrollment was higher than your births. Well, when you start having outside influences like charter school enrollment, that can change. But one thing that's not shown here is the influence all this new housing is going to have on the birth rate. It hasn't happened yet. When people move in, they may have a 1-year-old or a toddler, a 3-year-old. They weren't born here per se. So the state calculated them as born somewhere else. As people live here longer, you're going to start seeing your births tick up. So we have to know where every single student lives in this district. Well, we don't get quite there because there's some problems with addressing, but we get to about 99.7% accuracy with mapping. And so all these little dots, they're your students. And the purple are students from this school year. The green are students from 2 school years ago, I believe. Again, I can't see it, but what it's showing you is everywhere you see purple, those are where your new neighborhoods are. Those students didn't live here 2 or 3 years ago. So we know where that growth has been. So we have to have a clear picture of where people are living, the trends in every neighborhood in order to project forward. And we go further, of course, with grade level trend data and everything. But this just gives you an idea of how we start. And so one thing I want to show you. This particular map, I found it to be rather interesting. The red areas, we call these planning units. We split your district up into planning areas. They're typically neighborhoods or bounded by roads. The red areas are where we saw tremendous growth from 2020 to fall 2021. I believe anything over 50 students added in those planning units. Anything in blue was a negative, a loss of students. So you can see where some of the blues are, they're really on the edge of the district. That's that charter influence. That's where a lot of the charter schools are. The reds are a lot of your new neighborhoods. But the interesting thing to me is that a lot of these neighborhoods that are highlighted in red, they're not active anymore. And that's a point I'm going to drive home again. Foster Meadows, it built out about 2 years ago for the most part. That was an LGI community. I believe it's in the Sinclair zone. Costa Vida, same thing. Majority of it built out several years ago. Paloma has been building out for many years. It's not built out yet, but it's been going a little longer with some of these newer communities. Republic Meadows and Creek are also built out. This is where you had larger student increases. These homes are a little older, and now they're generating more students. So this is something we have to keep monitoring. They don't necessarily come right away, especially in smaller homes that are more starter homes, which you have a lot of in this district, by the way. So when we look at students per households, this is how we project forward. We have to come up with a number. How do we know how many students are going to live in every home? Or how do we project for that? Well, we take every neighborhood and every single family home and we average it out. And so in your district, on average, there are 0.39 students per home. And for apartments, there are 0.27. That 0.39 is very, very little for a suburban district. And a lot of that has to do with your geography. You're still partially pretty rural. So you're more of a rural school district, in my opinion. But that's changing. So a lot of new neighborhoods in other suburban areas tend to have 0.55 to 0.65 students per home. You're not generating that yet. That will change, and it can change quickly. Remember, starter homes tend to sometimes start with no kids. Multifamily, that's about on par with almost any suburban school district. All right, so the bulk of this presentation is going to talk about housing, because you see it. Just getting here today, I saw frames, rooftops everywhere. I saw new streets going in. You had 16 subdivisions break ground in the last 6 to 9 months. 16. I've never seen that anywhere, frankly. I mean, maybe Frisco 20 years ago in Dallas, but that's phenomenal. 16 developments breaking ground within about a half a year, on top of what was already active. What this shows, and I'm so sorry it's cut off again. I'm going to keep repeating that. What this shows is about 10 to 12 years of housing starts in this district. This data is actually straight from the Bexar County Appraisal District. Essentially, when you start a home, it's tagged with that year. You see those last 2 bars? That's 2020 and 2021. 21 is 2,147 houses. If you go back to 2019, it was under 1,000. It was only 993. That is a huge jump in just 2 years. And if you go back to 2017, it doubled from 2017 to 2019. That was pre-COVID. That was pre the mortgage rates being historically low. So this wasn't something that was induced by COVID and the low mortgage rates. This had started before. I don't want you to forget that. Developers were already honing in on your district because of its proximity to job centers, And because a lot of other districts near you, frankly, are pretty much built out, you're next. And this was happening before COVID, before the low mortgage rates. But those jumps are huge. Now, for the next couple of years, and you'll see this as we project forward, we're not going to assume that in 2 years it's going to double. We're dealing with these higher mortgage rates, so we have to factor that in. But the growth is here. They've bought into this district. People don't buy a development, buy a 400-acre piece of land, and then just abandon it because mortgage rates went up by 2 percentage points. They just don't do it. Sometimes the timing might slow down, but it's going to stay there. So this is just showing you cities within your district. I know a couple of people in the public comment mentioned cities. Everything in orange here, or the light orange, is the San Antonio jurisdiction. So you can see the majority of your district is within the jurisdiction of San Antonio. Their city limits are dark orange, and the ETJ, which covers subdivision planning and regulations, is in the light orange, the bulk of your district. It's where we are today. The green is St. Hedwig, Elmendorf down there in the south, off 183 is purple, and then Schertz and Converse have a little bit. China Grove is red. So we have to factor in what these cities know, and there's subdivisions that are coming online, new plats, new plans. They have the data, sometimes years in advance, but they also don't have everything. We have to look even further, which I'll address in a second. We look at utility planning, very important here. SAWS covers a big area, so when SAWS knows, when someone wants a utility service agreement, guess who they have to go to for a new development? They have to go to SAWS. So you can see the blue area is SAWS, basically San Antonio. Their wastewater region overlaps with these. So we monitor some of these districts so that we know what's coming. Very, very important. Within the last year and a half, there have been about 11,000 what is called EDUs, so the basic connections to wastewater, planned between about 87 and Old Corpus Christi. Those were given approval by SAWS for wastewater. So these are huge numbers that over the next decade will influence development in this particular region, where we are today, frankly. So let's get to some of this housing projection. What you're looking at is a map of just 1 year projections, and this is just single family housing. We start in February, when we essentially started gathering the information, and we push forward to that snapshot date when enrollment is officially counted at the state, to October. So just in those few months, that's about, 8 months, we're looking at these red highlighted areas. I don't actually know. Anything you see in red is greater than 200 housing occupancies. And we assume occupancies. These aren't starts. These are how many homes are going to be occupied by people. So a lot of these are under construction today. You can see there are a couple hot spots up there in the far north of I-10. Those subdivisions in Converse, Knox Hill, Knox Ridge, and Notting Hill. Down there in the south, that's your big guy, Southton Meadows. That's a Lennar development. They actually are your highest growth subdivision in the district. In fact, one of the highest growth subdivisions I've seen in Texas this year, frankly. You're seeing a couple of pockets, and then of course the continued development up here at the southeast corner, where 1604 and 10, Coloma, and those other developments around Coloma. That's just in the next couple of months. This is a new development, and I'm going to focus on these 3 colors here. So everything in green is active today. It's a lot of these developments I was just talking about. Everything in red has broken ground recently. Remember I mentioned there were 16 subdivisions that broke ground in the last 6 to 9 months? That's in red. They're focused kind of everywhere, mostly in the north and the south. And those orange pieces of property, well, those are planned developments. So you can see that behind these that maybe you're just getting infrastructure. The woman mentioned the Sapphire Grove development off of that. That's right there in red in the middle of the district. But look at all these other orange ones popping up. A lot of these have been given approval by SAWS recently. They've been having plats approved by the cities. there are a lot more planned developments in the pipeline. So real quickly, I'm not going to go over every single development in this district. There are too many. But I wanted to list out here, these are all developments that recently started. You may not even recognize the names. Frankly, some of the names could change as they start marketing them. But Sapphire Grove, that one right in the middle, 1,000 lots, that's the one that was mentioned off Beck Road in New Sulphur a second ago. So infrastructure is going in. All of these other ones, you can see the north has a very high concentration. They're all piggybacking off of each other for utilities, right? South of I-10. This northern portion of your district is the most concentrated area of new housing currently. And so in the next few years, you're going to start seeing all these listed in red here. You know, they're breaking ground today. You're going to start seeing rooftops tomorrow. And so you add all those up right there, and it's thousands of lots. The same thing goes in that 410 corridor right there off W.W. White. If you look right there, 2 neighborhoods have broken ground, and that's about 2,000 homes, all combined. Agave, Red Hawk Landing is what the plat said. I'm not sure if that's what they'll market it as. Oh, great, perfect. Thank you. Hickory Ridge, that's the big one in Elmendorf. It's almost 4,000 lots planned in Elmendorf, and that has also broken ground. And that's a huge, huge development now on the kind of corner of your district. All right, so what's planned? Well, you can see just as many, and these are all the orange developments. A lot is planned. Up in the north, again, another couple of thousand lots are likely in the future. We've had to project for them because we project 10 years out. A lot of the new development that Solace has recently started working with developers on getting some utility service agreements over here in the New Sulphur Springs corridor. And then this little other cluster over here in that W.W. White corridor, that is going to be a hot spot, as we've had 2 broken ground and we have another developer with about 2,200 wastewater allocations. But that doesn't stop there. As you can see, there are more and more. Like I said, I can't go through them all. But they are comprehensively outlined in Chapter 2 of the report. So the best way to summarize these, frankly, is to look at a map. And again, these are by planning unit. So every little red hotspot area is over 500 housing units, and this is just single family, projected to be occupied in the next 5 years. This is a 5-year map. So 22 to 2026. 2026 is a long way away. Who knows what the future holds? But we even have to go further and project to 2031. Because it takes time to build facilities, to plan them. So these hotspots, you can see that cluster in the north that I mentioned. It's very well defined. Over there, Graytown Road, Green Road, south of I-10 and north of I-10. And then you have another little cluster here in the New Sulphur Springs corridor, and then again in the 37 corridor. And these numbers, I have 45% in the north. In this 5-year period, 45% of all the new single-family housing is in that north cluster. It's almost half in the first 5 years, because that's where it's currently being developed, a lot of lots. In the New Sulphur Springs corridor, we're projecting about 16% of your growth will be in this corridor in the first 5 years. And then another almost 40% in the south part of the district, what I call the 3791 corridor. So you can see the north and the south really have the bulk of the short-term housing, but that doesn't necessarily mean the long-term housing won't be in this particular region. We're just seeing it start today. So let's focus on these 3 corridors. The first is I-10. One really important short-term development is the Arcadian Apartments. You've seen them pop up at the northwest corner of 1604 and I-10. So they're now about 40% occupied. In October, you had 1 student, and in April, you had 43. So this is actually a San Antonio Housing Authority project that they have partnered with a developer on, a lot of 3 and 4 bedrooms. So we had to really monitor this closely. And over the summer, as the remaining units lease up, they just finished construction. you'll see even more students enrolled by August. Those 3 developments there on the second bullet point, Paloma, Milliken, Savannah, they still have almost 1,400 homes left to be occupied, to be built and occupied. So that's, I mean, there's still a lot of homes in these 3 active developments, but most of them are projected to be occupied by 2026. And then the third bullet point there, really these are kind of your nice little factoids, I guess, the new developments. So we have 7 developments, I mentioned them a second ago in that slide. 7 developments that just broke ground with 4,200 homes, and in this northern region, another 3,400 planned in 5 more. That doesn't mean this is where it's going to end. You know, 6-7 years from now, we have to project on even more developments, maybe next door to some of these, you know, as other folks sell some of their property. But it may take a while. But these are going to be the most influential over the next decade. So now let's go to this region, the 87 corridor. Again, I mentioned SAWS, wastewater expansions, all these utility service agreements. Got to keep up with that because that can get you, it can help us understand where development is headed, 3 to 6 to 7 years down the road. It takes a while for these agreements to get set up and for developers to get going. So we know that now approximately 7,000 homes are planned in this corridor, and it grows every day. But we're not going to see the kind of growth yet. This corridor is a little bit behind the north and the south part of the district. So right now it's in kind of the infancy stage. But let's go to the south, where I mentioned 40% of the short-term growth was. Again, South to Meadows, it's just phenomenal. It's a lot of smaller starter homes. Almost 300 homes under construction. That's big, guys. That rivals some master plan communities in Houston. 244 are currently occupied, but there's still another 460 that haven't even started construction. And then in this region, there are 13,000 homes planned in just planned developments. That's a lot in this region. So we know that this is actually the area of the district with the most new housing currently on the books. But the north kind of has a little bit of a leg up. So when you look at projected housing occupancies, and if you're a board member and you saw this a 1.5 years ago, your eyes might have diluted, whatever, because it is a lot higher than what we showed you a 1.5 years ago, particularly in the longer term, looking 10 years out. You just have to remember a year went by, and you didn't have as much housing a year ago. But we're now projecting single family, that very first row. In the first couple of years, it's going to be a little slower. We were already hitting 2,200 houses started last year. That first row there, that 1,600, that's only about 8 months worth. But then you can see it doesn't really hit 3,000 until later in the projection. But hitting that 3,000 mark is a huge deal. That's a lot of houses to be built in 1 year in any given district. So as time goes on, your number of new single-family homes will increase. Single-family is really what you're going to see the most of here in this district. We aren't seeing a lot of apartment development yet. We will over time, but that's what happens. We tend to get the single-family first. There is one mobile home park that's planned, maybe another one as well. So you'll have some other mixes of residential development scattered around the district. But the bulk of your growth, almost 100% of it is single-family housing. So in total, 34,000 housing units are planned over the next 10 years. It's a big number. Stacy, do you remember how much Lamar has? I think it's 60. Yeah, so the school district with the most new housing in the state of Texas right now is Lamar CSD. It's Southwest Houston. It's a really big school, really ginormous. They have about 60,000 new homes over the next 10-year plan. So you're about half that. But to be half of Lamar is still really, really big. So let's move to student projections. We have to, we know all this is happening, but things don't always work out the way it looks, right? You think, oh, rooftop students, it takes a while to really get these students. I'll go over a couple of things here, but I want to show you this chart first. I know it looks scary, but focus on 2026, really. Because 2026, we know more of what's happening right now and in the next 5 years. That dotted line is your moderate growth scenario. And so currently we're at 10,000 students. We could see 13,000 by 2026. And that's phenomenal considering we really haven't grown much over the last couple of years. But remember, these houses just started growing, just started being built a couple of years ago. A low growth scenario can mean about 1,000 fewer students by 2026, so roughly 12,000 students. And what could happen in a lower growth scenario is we just don't see that kindergarten growth. We're expecting kindergarten to start growing in the next few years. We haven't seen it yet, but as these houses have families moving into them, as people get a little older and they start aging, you're going to start seeing more and more young children moving into them, or just moving into the student age bracket. But a lower growth scenario may mean that just doesn't happen as fast as we're thinking. It could also mean that in the next few years, you have a couple of charter schools plop down somewhere in Central. Let's hope not, frankly. At this point, it's kind of helped slow your growth a bit. But if you do see more charter school growth, let's say you go from an average of 90 students being taken away by charters every year to somewhere around 200 to 250. That's what a lower growth scenario assumes. It also assumes that you have about a 35 to 50% reduction in housing construction through about 2025, 2026, just because of these higher mortgage rates. The moderate growth scenario assumes not so much. It assumes maybe a 20% reduction in housing occupancies over the next 3 years or so. That higher growth number, which is a little over 1,000, 14.4, it kind of assumes the opposite. No charter school growth, charter schools slow down, they're a little concentrated right now. They just don't add any in this region for a while. It also assumes that you get to normal suburban student yields in some of these new homes, hitting 0.6. Some of your newish neighborhoods, maybe that built out 3 to 4 years ago, are at about 0.4. But if you see higher ratios, the high growth scenario is not out of the question because the typical suburban district sees higher ratios of students as time goes on. But the growth here is so new, it may take a while for that to catch on. So look 10 years out, but don't focus on it. Plan for it, but don't focus on it. I know it's hard to do. But that moderate growth number for 10 years out is approaching 20,000. Now, there's a wide gap there between the low and the high for all the reasons I mentioned before. It just gets wider as time goes on. Because let's say you do get 3 to 4 charter schools that have 1,000 students each pop up in or near the district, you could see a lower growth scenario. Or if the housing market does slow down to 50% of what you're seeing today for longer than 3 to 4 years. So we have to think about all these things. The higher growth scenario is not out of the question if you start seeing these kindergarten students come in. And the minute you start seeing it, it can happen fast. I'm thinking of Willis right now. They had 1 year, they have an enrollment that's lower than you. They in 1 year had, they're in North Houston, 100 kindergarten students. Their kindergarten population went up 125% overnight because it took a while for the growth that had been happening in the last 5 to 6 years to start actually showing up in the student enrollment. So that can happen quickly. It's happening in Liberty Hill right now. I don't know if you know where that is, in Austin. They have a lag as well. They have a lot of more starter homes than some of their neighbors just like you do. So their lag is happening now, and you're starting to see it in the kindergarten enrollments. So you won't be there, you'll be there pretty soon. It's just a question of how many move in and how fast. So let's real quickly look at that moderate growth scenario. It just shows you the numbers that the dotted line had. The first couple of years are a little wonky. If you look, we're actually projecting more next year than in 2023. And a lot of that has to do with the Arcadian apartments. I already know that you have 43 students that live in them and are enrolled in your schools, and you had, at the snapshot date, when you had 10,006 students. So I already know your enrollment is higher. So we have to factor that in, it's just gonna get even higher as more people move in. And so the Arcadia apartments and potentially a COVID bump, a little bit of a rebound that we've been projecting for, depending on how much that is, could cause your 2022 enrollment to be a little bit higher growth in 2023. But what starts to happen over time is this growth just gets larger as time goes on because of all the reasons I mentioned. And it can be affected by these small grades, kindergarten, first grade, growing quickly. And what happens is then every year those kids stay on and more replace them, and it just grows exponentially. And the housing doesn't stop at the same time. So just know that's one reason why your growth picks up, of course, but it does take a bit of time. You have a little breathing room. I see. I know it seems like you don't, but you do. So these first 3 to 4 years are when you really need to be focusing about planning for some of this growth that's coming. Whether it is the low growth or it's the moderate or high, it's coming. Time will tell us what it actually ends up being. It's still really new. Again, I wish I had that crystal ball. But with that, I'm going to take a breather. Stacey's going to come up and show you how this affects your actual campuses, and then we'll have a Q&A. I don't know if you want to see anything.
Thank you. You've been very patient, you've heard a lot of information. And now I'm going to relate all of this to the number of students per school and what that looks like over the next 10 years. But first, you know that we did a study a year ago, and so I'm sure you're wondering, how did that come out? Justin has told us a lot of really crazy, scary information. How can we believe you? So first, let's talk about last year's projections compared to this year's enrollment. So what you can't see at the bottom is overall, district-wide, there were about 200 fewer students that enrolled than we had projected. So we projected for about 200 more students than actually showed up. That was entirely at the elementary level. So at the middle school level, our projections were within 18 students of actual enrollment, and at the high school level, within 22 students of actual enrollment. So for that reason, I'm going to focus on the elementary schools, and let's take a second to explain. We, as demographers, project where people are going to live. We've heard a lot about enrollment and about new housing. We can project where people are going to live, and so the first few columns over here represent the resident students living in each attendance zone. But in this district, there are a lot of transfers among campuses, especially students going to Salado. And so your enrollment numbers are quite different than your resident student numbers, but we have to think about both. So the enrollment is on the right. So let's look at those by school. We're really happy with the projected versus actual enrollment for all these schools. We've been about anywhere between plus or minus 1 to about 50 for most of them. And Pecan Valley is the one with the biggest difference in enrollment. There were 100 fewer students than we thought there would be at Pecan Valley. So let's go back over to the residents, because we're looking at, was this difference because of students that didn't live there or students that transferred? And so indeed, both Highland Forest and Pecan Valley had fewer students in living there than we had projected. So what happened? What's going on there? Let's look at this next map. These are the same numbers we just saw before, so that's not important. What I want you to focus on is Highland Forest and Pecan Valley are the two I told you have about 80 or 100 students fewer than we thought they would. And now I'm going to show you where all of those charter schools exist. All of those yellow stars are charter schools. And look at their proximity to Pecan Valley and Highland Forest. I think that tells the whole story right there. Justin talked about how some of the charter systems have been expanding over the past few years. IDEA has the Najim campus and the East Side campus right over here. This is Jubilee San Antonio. This is Brooks. Those are both in the district. So that doesn't surprise me at all that an expansion of charter schools on the west side of the district impacted the enrollment at Pecan Valley and Highland Forest.
But overall, we were very pleased with the way the projections related to the actual enrollment. So let's move on to our future projection. This is another hotspot map like you saw with the housing, except this represents students. So all of these red planning units represent areas that over the next 10 years, more than 200 elementary students are projected to live in all of these red spots. And in the orange spots, between 100 and 200 students. So of course, just like the housing, you see there are hotspots in the north and there are hotspots in the central corridor and in the south. Now, what does this mean for the elementary schools at the elementary level? Where do those kids go to school? Well, the hotspots in the south are distributed between Oak Crest, Harmony, and Highland Forest overall. The hotspots in the north, however, are all concentrated in tradition. Yeah, just take a look at that. And now on the next slide, we're going to see some numbers. The additional students we are projecting to live in each of these attendance zones is shown here, the first 5 years, the second 5 years, and the total 10 years. Let this sink in a little bit. 2,200 additional elementary students are projected to reside in the current tradition elementary school in the next 10 years. That means all of the kids that are at tradition right now, plus 2,200 additional elementary students in 10 years. And that's under the moderate growth scenario. So you heard Justin tell us that the high growth scenario is not out of the question. That's not pie in the sky. We're focusing on moderate growth because we think that is the most likely scenario based on all of the information that we have right now. The rest of the schools are there are no slouches either. I mean, there's still a lot of growth in the other schools. It's just that growth is distributed among several schools. So Oak Crest has almost 1,000 additional students projected in 10 years, Harmony at 1,700, and Highland Forest at 400. So those correspond with the hotspots of housing growth that we've been talking about. What does this mean as far as timing of future schools? This is the number of students we project to be enrolled in each of these schools if nothing were to change. If no new schools were to be built, no attendance zones were to be changed. We're projecting over 3,000 elementary students to live in the tradition attendance zone and to attend tradition based on the current transfer patterns, if all of that stayed the same. These yellow highlights represent the year in which the student population is projected to exceed capacity by 120%. So we're not assuming that as soon as they get to capacity, then you have to build a new school. We're assuming there can be some creative placement of students, and that special program can be combined with another special reading program or whatever. And space can be squeezed, maybe portable buildings can be brought in. But at 120% is our threshold for saying above this, you just can't squeeze any more students in. You will be having kids eating lunch at 10 o'clock in the morning because you'll have to have 4 or 5 lunches in order to feed everybody in a limited cafeteria capacity. So this tells us that using that benchmark, and now every district is different about your threshold for being overcrowded. It's just that we, as an independent third party, we have to have some kind of threshold to compare. And so we say 120% capacity is that threshold, whatever it ends up meaning for you locally. But if we go with that 120% threshold, that means we need to open an elementary number 8 in 2013, fall of 2013, in order to relieve tradition. I know that's a tall order because we're coming up on that really early, but 1,000, almost 1,200 students are projected at tradition in fall of 23 if nothing happens. Okay. The next step would be in the south in about 26 to relieve Harmony, and also coming up on Highland Forest and eventually Oak Crest, and eventually Highland Forest. So elementary number 9 can be utilized a few years later in the south, and then 2 more elementaries, 10 and 11, in the north and the south, in the latter years of this projection period. Now, holistically, this makes sense compared to what you've seen previously when you saw the graph of the growth with the green cone. You saw it accelerating at the end. The numbers on the slide after that showed acceleration of growth at the end. We talked a lot about these starter homes having a lot of 1, 2, 3, and 4-year-old babies in them right now that will be entering the schools. We saw that happen on the very first map Justin showed you about the last 2 years, where growth has happened in neighborhoods that are built out, but they just built out a few years ago. So all of this holistically makes sense, but we have looked at it very specifically at every planning unit level. So overall, this is about 4 elementary schools in the next 10 years, and it's not stopping there. And I've even left off, there's probably going to be an elementary number 12 right here at the end of this projection period, but that's beyond the scope of this study. At the middle school level, the hot spots are the same, of course, but how does this look compared to the middle school attendance zones? Well, these green lines are the zones, and of course, most of the hot spots are located in Heritage. It's not surprising to any of you. Notice that these are next year's attendance zones after the rezoning that has happened, because we're looking forward. These are the total number of students projected to be added to each of these schools. So 1,800 additional students in the Heritage Zone, what will be the Heritage Zone next year. At the, as far as the numbers of the tables are concerned, this, again, these are next year's attendance zones. So this column here that says current students, that's not going to be what you know to be the enrollment of those schools right now. That would be the current enrollment if these attendance zones were already in place. So I know that's a little bit confusing. But this shows that Heritage is projected to reach that 120% threshold by about 2026. I think it's also important to throw in that last year when we were here, we told you that Heritage needed relief in about 2024. We needed to build middle school number 3 in 2024. But as a result of that zoning change, you bought yourself 2 years. You postponed the need for middle school 3 by 2 years by this zoning change that was just gone into effect. And so that here we see middle school number 3 needed in about 26. And then finally, at the high school level, there are a few assumptions in here. Overall, the projected high school population is over 5,600 students in 10 years. Now, we have assumed that the CAST LEAD program will expand over the next few years, adding bigger and bigger 9th grade incoming classes up to a maximum of 120 students per grade. So if that happens, if the CAST LEAD program at school can be expanded to about 450 or 500 students, then that's that many students pulled out of East Central High School. Then by about 2029, East Central High School is projected to exceed that 120% threshold, which is over 4,500 students. Now, at that point, something needs to happen. Some additional capacity is projected to be needed. What that capacity looks like is up to you as a community. In some cases, it could be another second comprehensive high school, or it could be a smaller specialized high school that draws students voluntarily, or whatever this community decides is best. But additional capacity at the high school level is going to be necessary in the latter part of this projection period. So to summarize, we're talking about as soon as you can get it built, the school up in the north to relieve tradition can be utilized, elementary. In 2026, an elementary and middle school. And in 28 and 29, 2 more elementaries and an additional, some sort of middle school capacity later in that projection period. So this can kind of help you think through bond planning and finance planning, et cetera. And so at this point, we will take any questions, now that you're quite overwhelmed. To the board.
I just had a quick question. No? Hello? Better guy. Okay, how do you, take into account like the multiple family homes? I know due to COVID, I know in my neighborhood, there were multiple families living in one home due to not being able to live, and as well as like, undocumented people and people that just refuse to fill out census data. How do you say, is there like a cushion in? I know it's kind of.
I mean, yeah, I know I get the question a lot, actually, all of them. But, you know, we can utilize census data. I'm just gonna start with that real quick. But things happen so fast, you know, with the new housing and all that. I mean, we don't even have all the census data yet because it was so delayed back in 2020. But so we can't really rely on it for much. In terms of multiple family homes, that's a question we get a lot in different communities for different reasons. You know, Converse. You have some housing developments which actually had student decline. That's where Idea Converse is located. And so that's one factor. Graduation can factor in.
Military families, I mean, I know we're not fans of charter schools, but I just want the community to be clear that it's other factors as
Yes,
well.
sure, all sorts of factors. And in fact, Stacy didn't mention it, but one thing that can also be affecting campuses is COVID. You lost 400 to 500 students in 2020. Not all of them returned yet. A year and a half ago, we were really anticipating a bigger increase everywhere, not just in East Central, but everywhere. But it didn't happen because COVID started, that fourth wave started in August, of course, right when school started. So that was a factor as well.
Go back to the slide that you mentioned, housing and apartments, you use some percentage. Then I get a classification of.
That's it.
How many students per
Right,
home?
you said per household and per apartment. I think that's not.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I'll talk about that.
Basically,
That's fine.
the question is, what explain these numbers a little more, right?
Yeah,
So when we take all of your single-family developments, every neighborhood, and we take the number of homes in those and the number of students, we get 0.39 students per every home. So for every 100 homes, there are 39 students enrolled in ECISD. There are more. It could be 0.45. I'm not sure. I have to do the math because there are others enrolled in private school. There are others enrolled in charter schools. But in your district, for every 100 homes, there are 39 students.
What are you using to determine?
Your students, we map them. Yeah.
You said we're using our students.
Yeah.
So you know the students are in that home or that apartment.
Correct.
So you're also enrolled. You're not predicting that
No.
this house has this many students.
Right.
You're not saying that.
Not at all.
Those green dots and purple dots are actual students.
You mentioned something about birth. How do you determine that?
Yeah. So how do we determine births? So that slide right here, that orange line is actual births reported to the state of Texas. So mothers living in this district or in these zip codes, we do a little bit of fuzzy math on that because the lines aren't perfect, but it gets to be pretty accurate. Your births are actually increasing slowly, but that doesn't account for new people who've moved in with, say, a 1-year-old. They were born elsewhere.
Okay, so you're getting that, how many kids born?
Since you're on that slide, the kinder enrollment has decreased during COVID. You said that was due to charter, but, or,
2 reasons, COVID and charters. Unfortunately, you had all these charter schools open up in 2019 and 2020. At the same time, you had overall enrollment declines, mostly in pre-K, K-1. Most of the enrollment losses in public schools happened in pre-K, kinder, and grade 1. So yeah, that was a bad, alignment of when those charters were built, unfortunately. And so that's hiding the growth that actually occurred. It's masking it. So that's what I'm talking about here, with a lot of different factors kind of overlapping in the same particular time.
so were all those kids charter, or, I mean, I know by law you have to start school at kinder. And I know at that age group, kids they're still not vaccinated, allowed to be vaccinated, but is that the only reason for the decline was charter?
It's a big reason. It's a big reason for it. It's hard to say,
Okay.
but yeah, it's a big reason.
We get data from TEA about how many students live in East Central and attend charter schools, but it's a lot more global because of FERPA privacy reasons. And so what we do know is that there are about 525 residents living in ECISD who attend all of the IDEA schools, any of the IDEA schools. 525 go to IDEA, 338 go to Jubilee, any of those those schools. 248 go to Brooks, 107 go to North Rose. All of the others are masked for privacy reasons because they have just a few students. But overall, TEA tells us that there are 2,100 residents living in ECISD who are attending charter schools. And that data is from TEA.
And I, just off the top of my head, only because I remember this number, the idea Congress grew by about 150 students, transfers from this district, just in this one year. So, and they only have K2, K3, and maybe grade 6 now. They only have a few grades, right? So they're different. So, yes, a lot of it was in charters.
You know, we don't track charter school growth. I mean, as far as new schools that are, know where they're at right now.
Unfortunately, we've actually, a big part of our job now is tracking charter school growth. We have to. We have some districts that lose 1,000 kids per year to it. Northside is one of them. We don't work with them, but they're losing a lot. So it's become a huge factor. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet, Stacy showed those stars, where all the charters are. Not to dwell on charters, but I will go back to it. We've done some math with where students live who attend charters. 65% live within about 3 to 4 mile radius of the actual school. So it's extremely important to monitor where they're going in. And it's hard. Sometimes we don't know until it's about 6 to 9 months out. And sometimes they can open a temporary facility before they open their permanent facility, right? So it can be challenging.
Let's verify the growth projections accounted for the charter loss, right?
Yes.
Projections,
Our projections have already taken out
right.
students that we anticipate to be lost.
When you go back to the slide that shows the needs of when schools are gonna hit 120%, we're hitting 100% with the trend line of charter loss continuing at the same rate and projected out. And at 120%, you're also saying you need to provide relief for that school. Right? That means school built, staff, furnished, doors open. Right? So in 2023, 24, ideally, we would be opening the doors to the school, changing boundaries to provide relief for tradition and enrolling students in this new school.
That's correct.
In 2023.
In 2023.
It's already accounted for.
For those of you who couldn't hear that through the microphone, Mr. Toscano just wanted to clarify that even with the projected losses to charter schools, our projections indicate that a school needs to be open and on the ground, if at all possible, in fall of 23 in order to provide relief for tradition.
So can you remind me how long it took for like an elementary and middle school and high school to be built?
From design to open the doors and everything in between. Carlos, 36 months?
Construction tradition was 14 months, 15 months. Design is probably another 7 to 8 months. So you're looking over 2 years. Middle school takes roughly between 18 months to 20 months. And you're looking at a design of probably about a year.
2 years for an elementary school, 2.5 years for a middle school.
The question was, how long does it take to design and build a school? And that was 2 years for elementary and 2.5 for middle school.
And then high schools you dealt with, it's like
High school,
same size as our district?
high schools run between 350 to, let's say, 200,000 square feet. That would be over 2 years. Between 24 and 26 months.
Okay.
For high school, between 24 and 26 months.
That's for construction. Design is another year.
Design is an additional year for high school.
3 years total?
What is the financial line? How is that affected by this, the wave or later on building? What does it look like
Well,
for our
inflation
economy?
has grown, it continues to rise, every single month. I don't know the exact calculations, but I think I had 16 to 20% within the year and a half. But who knows, everything is, the market is just crazy right now. So it's difficult, depends on, just the lead time of construction, steel, concrete, everything is really, really difficult right now. And there's multiple school districts that are building, and that doesn't help. I think Northside just passed $1 billion mark. So now all those resources for that school now will be spread out even thinner. And so now that dollar is going to be spread out even thinner.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you.
We really appreciate all your hard work, and this is a lot of information to go through and decipher, and it looks like we have a lot of work to do. So I do appreciate it, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
From that, yeah, so we'll capture the live stream and we'll post it on the website. It'll be accessible and archived there for anybody. Sorry, you don't have a microphone, but this meeting is going to be archived on the website, so you can tell your neighbors, friends, families, if they want to see the report themselves, they'll be able to go back, fast forward, rewind, watch particular clips of it that pertain to the area that they live in. And we'll be sharing more information with the community and engaging in conversations about what next. From now until next May.
Can I ask a quick question?
After, yeah, sure. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Now you can.
Now you can.